I mean, people have done, art out the wazoo.
Yes.
Print out the wazoo.
But
Uh,
food's its own unique.
Not, some people have done history, have included food in like historical treatments of periods.
Yeah.
What were the costumes like? What was the food like? What
Right.
was the typical day like?
Yeah.
But to put it in a current context,
Yeah.
the way you did, I thought was very well done. Your illustration
Well, thank
were
you.
excellent,
Well,
and they sort of they were very good.
well, great. I feel like I'm getting the signal that we may be at time Thursday.
go.
Are
Yes,
we,
that sounds like a plan. It
Are
is
we?
now.
Are we good to
We
go?
started?
Yes, we're good to
All right,
go.
let's do it. Well, it's great to see you
Great
again.
to see you.
Thank you for being, and great to have you back, Ron.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
So it's our last week of food. This is some of my favorite kind of, because we started with basic New York foods like hot dogs, I figured we would end with something a little bit more creative, right? Because that's how that works. So as a reminder, one food, one eatery, a day of iconic New York City foods, breakfast, lunch, dinner, dessert, everyone's favorites. And since it's our last week, I do want to, of course, know, as my grandfather always said, you start with dessert first, because you want to make sure that you get that in. So I got to know, what is your go-to dessert?
What is what?
Your go-to dessert. What is the dessert that you love?
I like them all.
All of them? Okay, great.
That's a silly question.
So you're of the let's have dessert before we have the meal crowd?
I could make a total meal out of the desserts. Unfortunately, my blood sugar does not agree with that.
See, that's the kicker
So
in there,
there
right?
has to be some discipline
Yes.
applied, which, don't eat this, eat that, and don't have a whole bun, have a bite of bun.
Right, exactly. Just in moderation, right?
Okay.
But then you get to try all the different ones.
And then you run into gourmet cooks.
Oh, yeah.
If you're lucky in life. And I've done that. And how can you turn, something incredible down?
Yeah, of course. Of course.
So.
Well, so one of each is your option, and I feel like that's the right option. So Thursday, do you have a favorite dessert?
I'm going to say it's as simple as ice cream.
See, I was hoping you'd say that.
Yeah.
Ice cream, yeah.
Ice cream.
Yeah.
Because it's just so good.
Yeah.
That's okay.
It's just I mean, it's okay, right? Well, if you're taking-
Okay, yeah.
Do you have is there a flavor that you go after?
No.
No? Okay.
No.
Just whatever is available?
Yeah, whatever's. Sometimes I'll try something that I've never tried before.
Yeah.
But no, ice cream pretty much in
Yeah.
all shapes and sizes.
Yeah.
I won't be mad at.
Yeah. Well, good. I'll be honest, as much as I want to do a bite of everything, I'm also team ice cream.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. I have an ice cream place that just
That's
popped
how
up.
we deal with children. We
Right.
give them ice cream to shut them up.
Exactly. You know what? I've been given so much ice cream in my life to keep me quiet that I think that's probably where that was
It works for adults too.
Yeah, exactly.
Works for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
Well, let's get with our first food of the day, which of course is breakfast, and we're doing coffee because coffee is New York. I mean, New Yorkers still drink more coffee than anyone else. Now, we talked last week about, I actually went and found evaporated milk because I was so intrigued and I tried it. It's really delicious, actually. Yeah. It's not as sweet, I guess, as I was thinking.
So you're thinking of the condensed.
Yeah, exactly.
Which
Yeah.
is very sweet.
Yeah,
very
yeah.
thick.
Mhm. Yeah.
So this is because the Korean is the Korean sometimes use condensed milk in
Right.
their coffees,
Yeah.
and they like it very sweet.
Yes.
And I choose not to. I don't know why. It's a very Spanish thing to have evaporated milk around the house.
Yeah.
Maybe from the wars and everything.
Sure, right, exactly. Canned
Why?
goods and things.
So
yeah.
my grandmother always had evaporated milk, and that's how I always drank coffee.
Yeah.
And now I've got my husband doing it.
Oh, well, perfect.
Yeah.
So keep it going.
Yeah.
So Ron, is there a way that you take your coffee? Or are you not a coffee person?
The what?
You like to have your coffee. Do you put milk in it, sugar in it?
I like my coffee from Starbucks.
Okay, all right. There we go.
I live right near one, and I don't even have to make the order. They know what I want,
Oh,
and that's my coffee. And I have 19 different coffee makers, and nothing ever works
Of course.
as well
That's
as
hilarious.
they do coffee. And yeah, despite the outrageous price that they charge for a cup of coffee,
Oh yeah.
but it's my patriotic duty.
Well, look,
to
see.
support them.
Yeah, well, Starbucks is going to show up in our adventure today, but just so you know, like, I know Seattle thinks it's all their thing.
Right.
It's actually us.
Yeah.
New Yorkers are all about coffee, and the reason we're all about coffee is because of the Dutch. So, of course, South America and South American indigenous populations have been drinking coffee forever, but it gets to New York when the Dutch show up, because the Dutch liked coffee, but the Brits liked tea.
Right.
So we were the anomaly. As a bunch of like Dutch colonialists that were coming in, New Yorkers started drinking coffee pretty early. But coffee was not breakfast. What was breakfast every day, where you'd be having yours and yours, was beer. We would start our days chugging beer in New York City. So this alehouse scene is actually breakfast. This is not late in the day. I know you said you had a daughter. You around the early 1800s, when New Yorkers really started to get into coffee, we would use it as an afternoon drink. But for breakfast, you would give your kids beer as their breakfast meal of the day, starting at age 2.
Wow.
So if you can imagine a toddler but drunk, that's basically what's happening in New York, which is wild, right? It's kind of awful and terrifying. But the reason we did it was because it helped keep the water clean.
Yes.
Water's less than ideal. So beer was for breakfast. And then when you started having coffee, it would be more of an afternoon pickup, right? You'd have it around 2 or 3 o'clock. And the first kind of European style coffee house shows up in New York City. It shows up in, because I'm so bad at dates, 1807, and it's called the King's Arm. This is what it looked like. And it was right down by Trinity Church. So if you've been downtown in that area, you know what we're talking about. And this was a place where if you were a merchant, you would come in the afternoon, hello sir, come on in. You'd show up, you'd have pick-me-up of coffee at about 2 or 3 in the afternoon, and then you'd go through your mail. And you'd talk with other merchants and things like that, and you'd kind of network and have a good time, and then when it was time to really party in the evening, you'd go to the tavern and just do hard alcohol. We just cut through the beer and immediately went to heavy
This was
stuff.
in the present downtown?
This was in the present downtown, yep. So, and as the coffee shop scene in New York starts picking up, actually coffee gets to be a really American thing because of the American Revolution. Because I don't know if you remember, but a bunch of Americans got really angry at the Brits, went to Boston, and threw a bunch of tea into the ocean. So suddenly drinking tea is out and drinking coffee is in. So as America becomes a little bit more of a coffee town, coffee becomes a big part of the history. This is Merchant's Coffee House, which was also in present-day downtown. And when George Washington eventually came through during the Revolutionary War, his first meeting and what they call the birth of the Union was in a coffee shop, and everyone sat around drinking coffee. Now, if we're in the early 1700s now and all of this is going on, if you were in Lower Manhattan, it would have smelled like a giant coffee roaster. I'm sure you would have loved it, but there would have been coffee coming out of every house because no one was producing coffee on a mass scale. It was just, I would roast my coffee at home and then I would grind my coffee, and that would be like how I make my coffee.
Today it smells from wine.
Exactly, today it smells from wine, exactly. See, we just transitioned from one delicious drink to the next. But this all changes because of this guy whose name was John Arbuckle, and he realized how much New Yorkers love their coffee. He was born in Pittsburgh, and he comes to New York and says, there's so much coffee happening here, I bet I can do this better than everyone just doing it in their own home. So he starts a business that is called Arrocio Coffee. He buys out warehouses in what is now Dumbo, right on the other side of the Brooklyn Bridge and the Manhattan Bridge, and he starts this massive coffee roasting empire. He creates machines that can roast it at a mass scale. He makes pre-ground coffee, and his big bid was, your coffee will always taste the same if you let me do it. And people fell in love with it. By the time we get to the early 1900s, when he was really hitting his stride, 86% of all coffee that was in the United States came from New York City. So we were the mecca of coffee. And the Arbuckle stores and the Ariosa coffee was known as cowboy coffee, because all the cowboys out in the West would drink that as their morning pick-me-up, get together, get to do things. And coffee in New York City has just like been this sort of wild beverage. New Yorkers still drink more coffee than anyone in the United States today, but it doesn't always just look like a cup of coffee. It might look something more like this.
Yeah, they bottled it.
Is anybody familiar with Manhattan Special? Is this a beverage that you've ever seen? Now, this is a weirdly kind of niche coffee drink that kind of is like an Italian version of an iced coffee. They were coffee sodas that showed up in the late 1800s because Italians were drinking all this Dutch coffee and saying, this stuff is terrible. It's not strong enough. It doesn't taste good. We want something that's a little bit more intense, but also something you can drink during the summer. So they added cane sugar, espresso, and seltzer water, canned it, and to get the name Manhattan, they actually named it after Manhattan Avenue in Williamsburg. So this was the original Manhattan Special beverage truck on Manhattan Boulevard. And it's kind of a niche, heavily in New York thing. Oftentimes when I talk to people about coffee in New York, that's the first thing that they think of. But the thing that people really think of, though, when they think of coffee in New York is probably the place where I started getting coffee in New York, which is the carts. And if you've seen the carts, you've seen this cup, right? I'm curious, has anyone seen one of these cups recently? No, probably not, right? So this one has a cool history. Greeks, immigrants, started taking over the coffee trade, right? They started working in diners and also started to do coffee carts. And to do that, they wanted something that reflected their Greek heritage. So they commissioned a group called Sherry Paper Goods to make the amphora cup, which is what this one is. And these cups surged, and they peaked in 1998. Or excuse me, not 1998, let me check, 1994, when over 500,000 cups were sold in New York City. And we hit this crest in 1994, and then it all comes crashing down. And the reason, we think, is something else happened in 1994. Starbucks opened its first New York City location.
Yeah.
And so now, people are not getting cart coffee, they're getting coffee at Starbucks.
What about the invasion of French wine?
Well, see, that probably brought all of our Long Island wineries down, right? Exactly. So this coffee cup unfortunately declined and was no longer produced in 2006. You can get short runs of it today if you really want one for your home or you want one for a party. But my favorite thing is, speaking of MoMA, they actually sell porcelain versions of this at the museum.
I've seen the porcelain version.
Yeah, they're really nice. I've got a couple at home. So this cup was sort of like iconically New York. And even though Starbucks kind of killed it off, we can't let Starbucks have all the glory, even though they're like the kings of coffee right now, exactly. Howard Schultz, who owns it and who runs it and who started the whole thing, was born in Canarsie, Brooklyn. So we can still claim credit for the coffee love. So coffee is still New York, no matter what kind of cup you're drinking it out of. And to do an iconic coffee location, and since I know you're a Village person, you've probably been here, we have to go to Cafe Reggio.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Of course.
yeah. I assume you spent a decent amount of time there. Yeah, it's a classic. So cappuccino, espresso.
No.
Yeah, all this. More cappuccino, more espresso. What's your take?
Espresso.
Espresso. Okay. So you like it strong?
Sit there for hours for $2.
Oh yeah, absolutely, right? Well, I went and checked the other day because I knew I was gonna go visit it today with you guys. They're still kicking, which is great. It's gonna take a lot to knock this down. But Cafe Reggio was never actually supposed to have been a coffee shop because the guy who started it was this guy. His name was Domenico Parisi, and he was a barber. Yep. You can come in if you like.
No, I'm going home. I just
Okay.
want to say good night. Good night.
Good.
Night, Stephen. I'll see you tomorrow morning. Bye, Mr. Schultz.
So Domenico Parisi, and he looks like it, right? He's got that like twisted, curled mustache situation. He was a barber, and he owned the location where Cafe Reggio is today. And he was so popular that he would have lines going out the door waiting to get their haircut. And so and the people who waited in line would say, well, if you're going to make me wait this long, you need to at least give me a cup of coffee to kill my time. So he started making coffee and selling it for 10 cents each, which is the same cost as a haircut. So he realizes, if I'm going to do this right, I need to get rid of the haircutting thing. We need to go straight in for the coffee. So he saves up $1,000 and buys the very first espresso machine in the United States. It was a coal-powered espresso machine brought over from Italy. And it was this revelation, and he was madly in love with it. Mary Alice, hello, come on in.
Oh, I'm sorry for interrupting.
No, please come in. So happy to see you.
Thank you.
We're just talking about espresso, so hopefully you like your coffee nice and strong.
Oh, I do.
Yes. So he buys this coal-powered espresso machine, brings it over from Italy, and becomes obsessed with it. If you take a look, this is a newspaper print announcing its arrival. You see he's got a hat on. He refused to approach the machine if he did not have a hat on his head because he felt the machine deserved respect. He would not let anyone but himself touch it. So if he got sick, no coffee. Just done. Whole place closed down. And he worked the thing until he eventually moved on and passed it on to another family that joined in. Now, they don't use it anymore because a coal-powered machine is not, it's a little questionable. But the machine is still in the location today. This is what it looks like. You can see it's nice and shiny. But now they continue to make espresso drinks. And it's been through two families at this point. It started with Parisi. He sold it to the Calavacci family. This is Miss Hilda, who took it over in the 1950s. She paid Parisi $10 a week to own both the building as well as all the stuff in it. And when she takes it over, we've now gotten into the 60s and 70s in the village. And I imagine you remember a little bit of this time. But that's a time when Cafe Reggio was the place you went for Jack Kerouac, for Bob Dylan used to write songs there. Elvis Presley even swung by a little bit in the early days. And it was the place where like bohemians were working. And on top of that, because it was so iconic, it also became the ultimate New York film set. This is from, so this is Joe Pesci. This was The Godfather Part 2. This was him on a break, drinking an espresso that he'd actually had produced inside during the shoot. But my favorite thing about Cafe Reggio, the coffee's great. Like, they do an excellent job, is the fact that everybody who got the place just added stuff. They never tore anything down, they just put more stuff up. So there's a lot of really cool art and artifacts in there. So this thing, which is still up, this picture was taken just before the pandemic. This is a Renaissance era painting by a follower of Caravaggio, who was one of the great Renaissance era painters. This kind of thing would be worth millions of dollars in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and it's just kind of sitting in a coffee shop. And while you can't touch that one, my favorite little secret piece is this thing. So this is a bench. It's kind of hard to see here. But this is by the Meucci family, who were kind of like the mob bosses of early Renaissance Italy. Lots of murders, lots of good intrigue. But a bench like this would be in the Metropolitan Museum of Art that worth millions of dollars. This is seating. So when I was in college, because I knew this was like a multi-million-dollar bench, I would go get my coffee and race in to try and sit down on this bench to do all of my homework, because I wanted to sit on a priceless artifact. Now, they're not open really for indoor dining. They've got a little bit of space, but they're still throwing espresso to go, and you can sit outside and enjoy it. And when I was walking by the other day, it was packed. Everyone was still having their drinks and, killing 2 hours for $2 out front with their beverage. So I hope you're well. Oh yeah, and this thing gets shined every once in a while too. It's still there. So hopefully you're all caffeinated, because we're on for lunch. And this one is by request, but it's kind of iconic in New York. We're having pizza, naturally, because you can't do New York without pizza, right? So Mary Alice,
Yes.
pizza lover?
Oh, yes.
Okay, what do you like on your pizza?
Oh, I just like cheese on it and a little bit of pepperoni.
Okay, cheese and pepperoni, classic. Dan, what's your take?
A lot of times I would say just cheese. I don't like vegetables on the pizza.
Oh, okay.
But barbecue chicken pizza I'm a fan of that.
Oh, okay.
Sounds good.
That's pretty good, yeah. Do you do barbecue chicken pizza or no?
No.
Okay. No, just a plain slice is good for you, or?
No,
Okay.
I'm the opposite.
Okay.
I like vegetables.
Okay.
And I love like sausage or bacon or
Mhm.
on my pizza.
Okay, all right, so pile it high with
Yeah.
stuff, yeah.
Mhm.
Ron, how about you?
If it's food, I'll eat.
It's food, I'll eat it.
Just put it in front of you.
There's
I
the
love
answer
it.
that we're looking for. There we go. Awesome. awesome. Well, yeah, pizza is pretty iconic for New York. And I used to be able to talk about pizza and tell the story that everybody tells, right? You've probably heard of this guy named Lombardi, and you probably heard that he is the person who brought pizza to New York. And this is the big famous picture, right? You've got Gennaro Lombardi's Italian Neapolitan pizzeria on the Lower East Side. This has been the story until this past year. Because there is a guy named Scott Wiener who is like the pizza guru of New York City, whose idea of fun during the pandemic was to go down to City Hall and dig through historic permit records for people who bought coal ovens or who got permits for coal-fired ovens in New York City. And what he discovered is that while we thought for years that Lombardi had the very first coal-fired pizza oven in New York City, that is not true. So the person who brought pizza to New York is this guy. His name is Filippo Milone. He was a Neapolitan as well, came over from Naples, Italy, and started to make he was a pizziola at home, so he knew his pizza, and he started to buy up locations all throughout New York City to start pizza spots. He was the progenitor of John's Pizzeria, which is in the Village. You've probably been there, pretty famous. And he was the very first person ever to receive a permit for a coal-fired pizza oven in New York. And this one goes all the way back, I think it's like 1860, if I'm not mistaken. So it's pretty early in Italian immigration. But what's fun about Filippo Milone and where it gets interesting is someone also found his old ledger, and there are regular salary payments to a nice gentleman named Lombardi. So we're pretty sure that Lombardi actually learned everything he knew from Filippo Milone. So Lombardi, as a young kid, comes over, he's gonna make his way, opens up a grocery store, realizes people want pizza, works his way up, and starts Neapolitan pizzas, right? Big coal-fired oven. And he teams up with a guy named Antonio Totono, so this is Lombardi, this is Totono, and Totono busts out of this whole thing and breaks down to start Totono's Pizzeria in Coney Island, which is also famous old school Neapolitan pizza. But in the early 1800s and even early 1900s, this thin crust New York City pizza piled high with veggies or anything that you got, that's not what we're eating. We are eating like tiny little pies that would have been burned to a crisp in an oven that looked kind of like this. So a coal-fired oven gets to about 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, which means you put the pizza in, it's done. Like, there is no time. You throw that thing in, a couple minutes, comes out, it is ready to eat. So the reason that none of these places sold individual slices is that the pizza can't wait for you. When the pizza's ready, you have to be ready. There's no other option. So there's no waiting around, no like, let's grab one later. Nope, you gotta go. And so most pizzas at this time in the early or late 1800s are being sold as full pies, and most of them are being sold for $1 a pie. So you show up, get your pie, chomp the whole thing down, and then move on. There's some stories that if you had just pocket change, you could give that and they would take that for your pizza. But most of the time it was basically $1 a pie and you were all set. All of this changes, and New York pizza as we know it, in 1934 because of this guy. His name is Frank Mastro. And he realized that coal-fired ovens were terrible. They're hot, 1,000 degree temperature is not safe in a busy city like this. You can't get a permit for it. So he wants to invent a gas-powered pizza oven, which are the ones that we kind of see today, right? And he starts hawking them to all the pizziolas in New York, and they say, what are you doing? This is terrible. You can't make this work. No one's gonna want this pizza. So Frank says, okay, I'll just open my own pizza stands. So he starts a bunch of different chains in like the Lower East Side area where he's selling pizza that is made on these gas-fired ovens, which are cooler, only usually 300 to 400 degrees, which means that they bake longer and the slices can last longer and can be reheated a little bit. And to everyone's surprise, people fall in love with this pizza more than the Neapolitan style. They love the fact that you can get a big slice, fold it in half, eat it on the go, and move, as opposed to having a pizza that has to be gobbled up quick. And the pizziolas love it because the pizza can rest for a while and be reheated, just like we do all our slices today, right? So this takes off, takes over all the coal-fired ovens, and suddenly slice shops show up. So these started in the 1950s. This is a very old school. Nunzio's is one of the oldest in Staten Island today. And you can see they've still got their gas-fired ovens in the back. So we start seeing this happen in the 1950s. It really peaks in the 1980s, and then the 2000s roll around, and this shows up. Don't know if anyone has ever had a slice at one of these places. How was it?
It looked pretty good.
It's pretty good, right? Yeah, it's okay. It's not crispy. It's a little like
Soggy,
it's a little soggy. Yeah, it's like it's a good slice, but it's
Yeah.
not like in the top whale. So the reason that Two Brothers Pizza today could sell you a $1 pizza slice is that they use kind of questionable ingredients. So the can is a little bit like the tomatoes might be a little expired. It's sort of second rate stuff. But the good news is it's still safe, and it's a pretty delicious way to get your slice in today, right? But most people would sort of like question that. But so you've got everything from Nunzio's, which is considered some of the nicest slices you'll get in the city, down to Two Brothers, which some people are like, what are you doing, right? And I'm sure everybody's got a favorite slice shop. I certainly do. I have one a block from my apartment, which has known too much of me in the last couple months. But there are so many that someone needed to be the authority in it. And so this guy, Charles Hagendorf, a couple years ago, made the decision that he was going to test out every single pizza slice location in the entire city. So he's tried every slice available to you in the borough of Manhattan, was sort of how he started. And he had a fully subjective, highly questionable rating system, but he came to the conclusion of who makes the best slice in all of New York City. And according to him, it is New York Pizza Suprema, right by Penn Station on 32nd Street, and I believe it's 8th Avenue. Has anyone been or seen this place? No? Okay, cool. So,
Can't remember.
yeah, it's completely forgettable.
Right.
I went because I was told it's the best slice in New York City.
Uh-huh.
I tried it, and I'm happy to report that it is perfectly mediocre. So if you need a slice near Penn Station, sure. The problem is they know that they are the best slice in Manhattan, so they charge you $7 per cheese slice.
What?
I know.
How many? What?
$7.
8 slices?
One slice. Yeah.
Outrageous.
Add
Yeah.
a little bit and you get a whole pizza.
I mean, right from
From
exactly.
anywhere else. Right?
Exactly, literally anywhere else. So if you need a slice, try it. I don't mean to like, their pizza is fine, but
Yeah.
like it's not
Not $7.
It's not $7, no. I mean, I will happily go and get my Two Brothers
Yeah.
slice in the village before I'm going to spend $7 on a slice here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you understand. All right, so if we're going to go for good pizza, though, we're going to go to one of the like kings of pizza locations, super old school. We're going to go to Grimaldi's Pizza. Yeah, has anybody been out to Grimaldi's?
I was there once.
Oh yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was a long time ago. But
Yeah.
I think it was 4th of July.
Oh, okay.
Only problem was we took the pizza to go and then it started raining. So
Well, that'll ruin everything.
yeah, so I said I'll have to go back there someday and give it another. It was still good, even slightly rain soggy.
Yeah. So, did you make it out there, Ron, or no? No? All right.
Been there.
So, this is technically one of my local pizza places because I live a couple blocks away from them. So, they're in.
Where is this?
This is in like Dumbo area. If you can see, kind of for context, this is the Brooklyn Bridge. So the
Okay.
Brooklyn Bridge goes straight over it in Brooklyn. So this is their current location. This was an old bank building. And this one is a classic old school pizza. It's big pizzas. You have to buy the whole pie, so no slices. And there are usually long lines of people waiting. It was started by this guy named Patsy Grimaldi, New York native, born in the Bronx, one of 5 children. His father died when he was a kid, and so he took a job to help support the family by sweeping the coals out at Patsy's Pizzeria in East Harlem, which is another one of our like iconic ones, because Patsy was his uncle. And he worked his way down from the guy who shovels the coal up to being the guy who actually runs the place. And after having worked under Uncle Patsy for a few years, in the 90s, he decides he's going to start his own pizza joint. But by 1990, it was illegal to build a coal-fired oven in Manhattan because they didn't want us to burn the place down, and they're like sooty and smelly and gross. So he goes to one of the few places in the early 90s where you could get a lot of space and still get a permit, which was what is now Dumbo, so right underneath the Manhattan Bridge in Brooklyn. And this was his original spot. He actually had the building built, and he had a coal-fired oven put in the back, and he names it Grimaldi's Pizzeria, and he's doing old school, no slice, cash only, real traditional old school pizza with his own coal-fired oven. And he loved it. He was making old, really traditional Italian-style pizza. He actually showed up literally every single day to make the pizza. He would not let anybody do it. And he got a little bit of a name for himself as being a hot place to get pizza in Brooklyn, and specifically among construction workers. Because in the 90s, Dumbo was being built up. There was tons of construction, so this was a cheap place to grab a lunch. And in 1998, when he decides it's his time to retire, he hands it over to Frank Cioli, who had been a construction worker at the time and wanted to go into the pizza business. So Cioli buys both the location and the Grimaldi name. Patsy Grimaldi is his. And Patsy goes to New Jersey, retires, and Frank continues to run Grimaldi's. And now is where our story gets interesting. Because in the year 2011, Frank Cioli loses the lease on Grimaldi's. The building that he was in, the landlord says, "You're out." And as we dig deeper, he was about $60,000 behind in his rent. So he's panicked, he needs to keep his business going. So he decides he's going to abandon the place he can no longer get, which is here, and move one building up to right here, where there's a big building for rent that he could put his pizza place in. But when he gets there, he realizes the thing that made Grimaldi's great was they had a coal-fired oven. And the problem with a bank building is there's no coal-fired oven. So he needs to get one. He applies for a permit. And while he's going through the permit application, there are questions on his account because someone is calling the permit office and leaving them hints and notes about Cioli. This, interestingly, lines up with the same time that our buddy Patsy decides to come out of retirement. He hears that his old pizza location is available, gets the lease back, gets his old oven back, and realizing he can't use his name anymore, changes the name to the place's name to his mother's name, which was Giuliana's. And now you have Giuliana's with the original oven next to Grimaldi's with their new oven. Now, these two have been suing each other back and forth for years. One will claim that one is doing illegal construction, the other one will claim that their permits are not in order, and it's been a back and forth lawsuit fest for almost 8 to 10 years at this point between the two. The good news is there's enough pizza for everybody. If you show up in Dumbo today, I guarantee you there will be a line in front of this one and a line in front of that one, because everybody wants their pizza. And for your, knowledge, I've tried both. They're great. Grimaldi's is very good. I think Giuliana's kind of has edged them out ever so slightly. And I'm happy to say that my opinion seems to stand, because in 2015, TripAdvisor did a review of the best pizza places in the world, and Giuliana's was listed as #1. So Patsy finally wins. On the flip side, they also listed that the #1 pizza city in the country is Chicago. So I don't know how much I could actually trust TripAdvisor at this point. That said, I still agree that Giuliana's may be our best. I don't know, Ron, you seem concerned.
I live there and never had pizza in Chicago.
Well, there you go. See, I guess that then continues to prove that we're probably on top. So, there's our pizza lunch. Classic old school pizza wars of Dumbo. And now it's dinner time. And honestly, we've been going out so much. I figured today we would just order in. So we're having Chinese takeout.
We had a lot of martinis in Chicago.
Okay. Well, there you go. Were they good martinis?
They were excellent.
Okay.
Every afternoon between 4 and 6. A cocktail party.
Well, that's good.
Oh my god.
I know they're known for their hot dogs too, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yes. Oh yeah. With all sorts of weird things on them, like pickles and all sorts of crazy stuff, right?
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
It's not like a New York hot dog.
No, totally different. Awesome. So we're doing takeout Chinese. I'm curious if anyone has a standard takeout Chinese order. Like, what is your go-to?
That's Sunday dinner.
Right. Well, yes, naturally, right? Mm-hmm. No, it's good stuff. I mean, I'm a chicken and cashews person. Like, that's my go-to. I'll get an egg roll. That's my mix and match. You have one?
I used to do general. I don't even know how to say it. General Tso's, General Gao's,
General Tso's?
depending.
Mhm.
Here, General Tso's. Then I saw how many calories and
Oh.
fat is in it, and
Yeah.
I said, okay, I'm switching to beef and broccoli.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
Keeping it trim. Do you have a Chinese order you like?
Oh, no.
No Chinese.
I
Okay.
don't eat Chinese.
Okay.
I just.
That's okay.
doesn't appeal to me.
That's okay. Everyone's got their own. Do you have a preferred Chinese order that you enjoy? No. How about you, Thursdays? Anything coming your way?
No, not really.
Okay.
Yeah, it depends on the place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Each one's got a little something different,
Mhm.
which is good. Do you have a Chinese food order you like, or
Shrimp and broccoli.
shrimp and broccoli?
Yeah.
Oh, nice. Awesome. Well, we've done all these other epic Chinese, foods. We've done hot dogs, we've done bagels, we've done all this stuff that's iconically New York. But Chinese takeout is actually older than all of these things. Chinese takeout shows up in New York City before the hot dog and before the bagel. It is some of the earliest sort of brought over foods that we are continuing to consume that are part of our like iconic repertoire today. So Chinese immigration starts to the United States in the mid 1840s, so about mid 1848, and they are coming to the West Coast because of course it's a little closer to get to California. So the very first Chinese restaurant in New York is in California. But as the railroad construction is happening, and we all know Chinese Americans were very influential in getting the railroads built, and also because of racism that was happening in California, a lot of Chinese Americans moved to New York City pretty quickly in the early 1950s. And the Chinatown that we have in Lower Manhattan today is one of the earliest in the country, predates the Civil War, goes all the way back to the 1850s. Which also means that in New York, before German and Italian immigrants and some of that iconic food was happening, and tomatoes and potatoes were really being grown in the Bronx, there were places growing bok choy and ginger in the Bronx before any of this other stuff showed up, because you had all these Chinese Americans who needed food grown, and they were making more traditional Chinese food. But the folks that were coming over were enjoying Cantonese specialties, which is a little different than we've got today. So as Chinatown starts to develop, most of the restaurants and most of the food that's moving around is just being eaten by local Chinese Americans. It's kind of a little bit of an insular crowd. No one's really going to visit it. And that starts to change in the mid-1920s because of this dish, chop suey. I don't know if anyone's had chop suey recently. No? So this came about in 1888 because Chinese dignitaries came to New York City, and the nice people of Brooklyn wanted to throw them a nice dinner, and so they decided to produce a specialty dish for the dignitaries. So they took basically a bunch of noodles, a bunch of vegetables, and a bunch of meats, chopped them all up, put them in kind of a sweet and spicy sauce, threw an egg on top of it, and served it as New York's homage to China. And it kind of took off. Like, New Yorkers started to really love this thing. And it picked up traction in the early 1900s and all the way into the early 1920s because a lot of the people who were coming to New York and the next generation of folks who were born here were tired of bland food. We basically did not want the same thing that we've been eating for years and years, so we were looking for something a little bit more exciting. And once you get into the 20s, chop suey houses in Chinatown become this destination. So people would come from all over the city to Chinatown to get to try chop suey and to experience something that was very inexpensive, very filling, way more flavorful than they were used to, and kind of explore what Chinatown was. And so there was this big, like, weekends people would go and have drinks and chop suey down here, and it became so iconic of the 20s that Edward Hopper actually made this painting, which is representing New York City inside a chop suey house. So this was like the trend. And as Chinese Americans are starting to push outside of Chinatown, they really hook up with two different groups in New York. First off, they hook up with the black population because they're able to produce food pretty inexpensively, and also they had deep fryers. And a lot of the food that was needed that the African American community was eating was fried. And so there was a symbiosis that happened there. And in addition, they hooked up with the Jewish community because their food was kosher and they were open on Christmas. So you get this expansion into all these different communities from Chinatown all over New York City. And as New Yorkers' tastes start to change, the Chinese American community actually adjusts the food for that. So in the 50s, when canned food starts to come up, there's like sweet sauces that are inside the cans, and Chinese Americans say, well, if people are eating sweet sauces, let's make sweet sauces. So they invent sweet and sour sauce, which we have today because of canned food. When people start getting into broccoli, Chinese Americans say, well, let's put broccoli in our stuff, and we get beef and broccoli. Like, that's what the evolution of this thing turns into. It's all these little mixes. But then everything changes again once we get to menus that look like this. And this is in the 1980s. So in the 80s, suddenly there's a huge influx of Chinese American or Chinese immigration, and the people are coming over specifically from Sichuan, China. And if you know anything about Sichuan food, it's spicy. Yeah, it's really spicy, really spicy. So Sichuan food is showing up in New York City, and all of a sudden, this chop suey thing is a little too bland for New Yorkers. We want something even more exciting. So Sichuan-style Chinese restaurants start popping up throughout New York City, and New Yorkers become obsessed with the spice. And specifically, New Yorkers who are living in parts of Manhattan really want the convenience of having food brought to their home. So Chinese Americans, new immigrants, start making small little Chinese restaurants that always looked kind of like that, who would deliver to your home. And they started dotting them all throughout the Upper West Side. So much so that for a while they referred to the Upper West Side as Sichuan Valley because they had so many Chinese restaurants that you could basically stumble over them as you went around the corner. This killed off chop suey, this killed off Cantonese, and suddenly Chinese food as we know it, takeout Chinese, is the dominant flavor that we're eating. But that's not the only thing that's iconic about it. It's also, these pails. This is totally a New York City invention. It's actually technically a Japanese invention. So this is based off of the oyster pails that New Yorkers, especially going back into the 1800s, would eat out of. So they wanted a design that looked like an oyster pail, so people were kind of comfortable with it. But they also wanted something that would be light and inexpensive and made out of paper. So they went to a Japanese design firm and said, can you guys make this out of paper? And they said, sure. They made this sort of iconic design that all folds up, and that became the way that all of our Chinese food was delivered until restaurants gave up on it for plastic, basically, is what it's moved over to. So that is the history of Chinese food, but if you want some really good Chinese, I might recommend Numwa Tea Parlor down in Chinatown. Has anybody heard of or visited this place? Okay, these are one of my favorites. So Numwa, let me just grab my notes because I want to make sure I don't screw up the dates on this one. So Numwa is one of the older Chinese, specifically tea parlors that's located in Chinatown. It started in the 1920s, right when the chop suey boom was going on, right? Everybody was hanging out, and it was specifically kind of straddling the line between snack house and also soda fountain. So they were trying to hit a couple different angles. They mostly did baked goods and pastries as well as dim sum. So lots of different small dishes everywhere. And we don't know too much about the original owners, but Mary and Ed Choi took it over in the 1950s and really turned it into like a hip place to be. So suddenly, once everyone was done with their chop suey and they wanted snacks, they would head over to Numwa Tea Parlor and get dumplings and sweets. And they had a line out the door, but they didn't really get put on the map for the Chinese American community until this guy shows up. So his name is Wally Tang.
Which one?
Oh, sorry, this guy.
Oh.
This guy right here, yes. Wally Tang, so he was a Chinese immigrant that came over in the 50s. Again, started at the bottom just as a server and wound up as the general manager. And he looks at the recipes that they're putting out and he says, I think we could really make a killing. And so he starts to focus them in on these things, which are called lotus cakes. So this is a special cake that is eaten during the Mid-Autumn Festival, which is time when people are, like Chinatown is extremely busy. And it's made out of red bean paste and lotus root, so it's kind of a sweet, sticky, really very delicious cake. And Numwa Tea Parlor became the place to go for these cakes. So in addition to all their dim sum, they would have lines out the door for people waiting to get these cakes. This keeps going into the 70s, kind of dips a little bit in the 80s, and just as Sichuan Valley is showing up on the Upper West Side, Numwa Tea Parlor starts to look a little like this. Because now no one's going to Chinatown for all of their Chinese food, they're just waiting to get it delivered to them. And Numwa Tea Parlor went back from being this destination that people came from all over the city to go to being kind of a local hangout for Chinatown merchants. So if you had a restaurant, you'd come and have some tea and some snacks and hang out and network with folks here afterwards. And the problem with that for the restaurant was that they just couldn't keep things going. And there was a really distinct risk that they were going to go under, even though they had been this icon of Chinatown for years. It was such an issue that if I would, for example, wanted to walk in and get dim sum, which they've been known for years, the only way for them to get it for me was to go out the front door and go next door, order the stuff, and bring it in. They weren't even producing any of their dim sum. So knowing that this place was not doing so great, in 2010, Wally turns it over to his cousin, whose name is Wilson Tang. He's the current owner of the place. Wilson kind of lived the dream, I think. He was an investment banker for years because that's what he was told he wanted to do, and he went to school for it and he made a bunch of money. And then he realized he hated working on Wall Street, so he took over the family restaurant, which really pissed off his parents. But he looked at Numwa and he said, okay, well, how are we going to make this financially successful? First, we're going to get rid of any of the dim sum situation. We're just going to do a la carte, order it off the menu, no more waste. And we're going to clean up the kitchen. But knowing it was this icon, he left everything else the same. So this is actually a current picture, well, pre-COVID, but picture of their interior. And you can see it's still got the tile, it's still got all the blue, it's still got the stainless steel. It's still kind of old school. He's maintained all of that. And he kind of made it a fun place to go and have dumplings. I used to go here with friends and have epic dumplings on Sunday, so we would all go and just order 1,000,000 dumplings and just have drinks, and it was really wonderful. And then of course COVID hit, and so because William Tang is trying to keep this place afloat, he did a couple things. He got delivery going, of course, just like we do with all Chinese food. But because they became so well known for their dumplings and their mooncakes, he actually started delivering packs of frozen dumplings around New York City. So you could pick a day and they would show up in the neighborhood with basically make your own dim sum at home. Just a big frozen pack of dumplings, you throw it in a steamer and you've got dim sum for yourself. I tried it once, it was great. Not quite as good as eating there. But, few things represent the ambiance. So they are open, they have outdoor seating right now, they're dabbling with indoor seating, but I'm pretty sure that the dim sum at home is going to stick around because they're still doing deliveries all throughout the city. You just have to figure out what day your neighborhood is and they will show up with your dumplings. So there's our Chinese, but we have to get to dessert because as we discussed, that's the most important one. And I went for a classic New York City icon to end us on today, cheesecake. Have to have cheesecake, right? I hope I have cheesecake fans here. Yes? Okay, awesome. Yes, cheesecake? Awesome. Mary Alice, cheesecake?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you like your cheesecake plain or do you like it with anything?
Oh, I like blueberries on it and strawberries.
Okay, blueberries and strawberries, good fruit compote, awesome. Esther, how about you? Cheesecake?
Creative chefs
Plain.
have tried to
Plain and less
modify
creamy.
that.
Plain and less creamy? Okay. And what were you saying, Ron? I'm sorry.
I said it's been modified by so many people that God only knows what it is today.
Well, yeah, right? There are so many permutations of New York cheesecake. And I wish I could say that we were the inventors of the cheesecake period, but we aren't. That gift goes to our friends the Greeks. So cheesecake goes all the way back to ancient Greece. It goes back thousands of years, and believe it or not, in ancient Greece, on the island of Samos, where it was invented, this was considered a health food. So the idea was, if you needed to get a little extra energy, you would eat cheesecake, which I'm going to put in my back pocket for the next time I want a piece of cheesecake, because the Greeks kind of knew what was going on. They actually, this is a picture, I know that it's doctored, they've got cheesecakes in our hand, but this is not too inaccurate of how you'd eat cheesecake in ancient Greece. Because if you were an Olympian, they would give this to you as your recovery food. Give you a slice of cheesecake to eat to kind of bring you back. And the Greeks kind of got it going. The Romans really started to push it forward and started to send it all around Europe. And by the time the reason it gets to the United States is because it made its way to Britain. And the first time we see cheesecake in the United States is actually because of this lady, Martha Washington, who in one of her first cookbooks created a cheese custard, which is similar to what we would think of as cheesecake today, right? A nice crust and some like cheesy filling, maybe too thick for Esther. But the thing I need to be really clear about, because we've talked about how technically black and white cookies are not cookies, they're cakes. And we talked about how black and white cookies are also not cookies, they're cakes. Well, I hate to say it, cheesecake is not cake. Okay, it is custard. It is a crust with a filling on the inside. It is not actually a cake, which is the problem. But it's been sort of mutated into so many different ways. But the origination of cheesecake starts kind of in upstate New York because of this guy. His name was William A. Lawrence. And his claim to fame is that he accidentally invented cream cheese. He was trying to make soft cheese and he put too much cream in it. And as he started whipping it, he realized that it was kind of delicious and also a little bit spreadable. So he starts boxing it up, sends it down to Philadelphia. We get Philadelphia cream cheese. And Philadelphia makes an attempt at cheesecake. And we're going to call it an attempt because it just kind of ran everywhere. It's not good. Might be even too soupy for you, Esther, because it's just not even, it doesn't even stick together. But when we get New York cheesecake, it's from this guy. His name is Arnold Reuben, and you might recognize that last name from something else that's kind of delicious. He's the inventor of the Reuben sandwich, among other things. He went to a party on the Upper East Side, got a taste of a cheesecake, and fell in love with it, and said, I can do this better. So he takes it back to his chain of restaurants, which were called Reuben's Restaurants, big chain of diners. Yep, you've been to a couple of these? Yeah. And he starts mixing in cream cheese and creates what we think of as that dense New York style cheesecake that we have today. And it becomes so popular at Reuben's that his main competition, Lindy's, completely rips him off to the point of stealing his pastry chef to start making cheesecakes at Lindy's. Lindy's adds strawberries on top of the cheesecake, and because a lot of their locations were in the theater district, become the haunt for all the Broadway performers. And if you know Broadway, if you know Guys and Dolls, the musical, Mindy's cheesecake is actually Lindy's cheesecake. That's where that comes from. Yep. So cheesecake sort of has been, is New York. There's so many different permutations of it. And while it is New York, other people outside of New York like it. And the reason they like it is mostly because of this guy. His name was Charles Lubin. He's a Chicago-based baker who tasted New York cheesecake and said, I make nothing else for the rest of my life. I'm only going to make cheesecakes, but I'm in Chicago and I want to go big. So he starts a little company named after his daughter called Sara Lee. And the very first thing Sara Lee puts out is New York style cheesecake. And that's how it gets to the rest of the country. I don't know if anyone's had a Sara Lee cheesecake recently. Yeah, it doesn't quite, if we've got the real thing here in New York, it's not worth the frozen bit. It's pretty good, but if you're going for cheesecake anywhere, all right, and then the Golden Girls also popularized it, lest we forget. But Sara Lee was the one who got it out of New York and got it to everybody else. But if you're looking for really good cheesecake, I'd suggest right, naturally. So, who's been to Junior's recently? Anybody? Swung by? Yeah, awesome.
It's all over the city right now. There's one in Times Square. It's called Junior's.
I'm sure I'm
Yep. The Times Square location, I think, just reopened, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and there's one in Grand Central. There's a small Grand Central.
Yeah, Miami, well, yes, they franchised too, right?
Yeah.
So Junior's did not start as the cheesecake mecca that we know it as today. It started by, what was his name? Harry Rosen, who was a businessman. This is him right here. This is his wife. He actually wanted to start, when he got out of school, he and his brother, who's right here, started an ice cream parlor, which did horribly. So they went into the diner business, which was called Enduro's right here, and he opened up the location in Brooklyn that's right on DeKalb and Flatbush, the big iconic one, right, as a diner that kind of looked like this. And it was old school, like 1950s style, or early 1900s style diners progressed into the 1920s and 30s, making it through Prohibition. Right after Prohibition, they added a bar, which made them very popular with all the Navy boys down at the Brooklyn Navy Yards. And then, unfortunately, in 1949, he gambled away all the money that was in this and basically had to start from scratch. So Harry kind of re-envisions what he wants this place to be. After being in the diner business and having been to Florida, he wants a family-friendly place where you can hang out, have big meals, overstuffed sandwiches, big desserts, and it's kind of cheap and friendly for everyone. And so, on election day in, because I am so bad at dates, 1950, Junior's opens. And his concept was that it should be way more food than you can deal with for way too little money. So for $2.50, you could get a full 3-course meal plus dessert, overflowing drinks, red checker cloth tables, like family-friendly spot. And his concept took off. They kept going and they kept pushing forward. And he continued to kind of experiment with desserts. So in 1958, he decides he wants in on the cheesecake game, and he gets a chef named Egil Peterson, who was a Danish chef who was interested in cheesecake, and sends him out to try about 48 cheesecakes in New York City to decide what he liked most. And he comes up with a recipe that's got that dense cheese with the sponge cake on the bottom. And that spongy cheesecake, thank you, that spongy cheesecake kind of takes over, and Junior starts doing this, and they kind of keep it under the table, but it's just the kind of thing that you'll grab. Until, 1973. So in 1973, New York Magazine decides to do a series of different underground gourmet episodes. And they go around and they start trying different iconic foods from all over the city and ranking them from top to bottom, from best to worst. And the issue with this whole thing was that they didn't tell anybody that they were going to do it. So they would just publish the article and not let any of the restaurants know. So they do a cheesecake article. They determine that Junior's is the very best. And the way that Harry and his entire family find out is because they show up the next day and there was a line around the block before the place is opened. This is Harry the day after it went out in the paper. You can see it looks like he's been up all night because he basically didn't sleep for 24 hours. Because people were so obsessed with the cheesecake that they needed to keep pumping it out, plus he was doing interviews everywhere. And that was the thing that really nailed Junior's as being the top cheesecake spot in New York. Now their cheesecake is very good. I'll say it's pretty excellent. I don't know, you probably know with getting the COVID vaccines, they've been giving a lot of freebies away. Junior's was doing a little mini cheesecake if you got your vaccine, and that was the first place I went after I got my card, because I felt like it would be the right thing to do. And honestly, that kind of advertising means that this is one of the few ads they've ever had to put up. This was my favorite one I could find. It was advertising Junior's Cheesecakes for Valentine's Day, because after that 1973 article, they just kind of blew up. They've almost never had to advertise since then to kind of get people excited about their cheesecake. And today, they not only have their location in Brooklyn, which has been going the entire time, but they're in Times Square and Miami Beach, and they ship. So if you need a cheesecake right now, you can get one in your mailbox for the low cost of about $50. So there's your day of iconic eating. Started with our coffee, grabbed some pizza, had our takeout Chinese, and ended with cheesecake at Junior's. So that's what I've got for you guys. Stay hungry, folks. Thank you so much for letting me geek out about food with you guys for the last 4 weeks. It has been a real pleasure. And I think to end today, we do have a little bit of cheesecake.
We do have cheesecake, yes.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you have cheesecake here?
We do, as a matter of fact. And we have a variety pack, so you can have the chocolate style, the plain, the
They put it, they just put slices.
Comes all the way from
Yeah.
Florida.
Exactly. Not Junior's
Yes.
cheesecake. I figured that might be a step too far,
Steven,
but
do you want some? Do you want some help?
I'm sure it's delicious.
oh,
Would
it
you
will
like
be.
one? We have the
delicious. You
turtle
can't go wrong with
cheesecake,
cheesecake.
chocolate
right?
cheesecake,
Of course
chocolate. Okay.
Can I
This
help
one here?
you? Can I help you?
Oh, sure.
So I guess I should probably take orders. Do you have a preferred
Yeah,
flavor
let's
for
take
your
orders.
cheesecake?
Chocolate,
Chocolate.
just a little.
Just a little bit. Okay.
That would be very
They're little
nice.
guys too, so they're good little.
So very nice. It's very,
Right, and Ron, is there one that you
very
like?
good.
Beg pardon?
Is there a flavor of cheesecake you'd like?
Just,
Just plain.
just plain,
Okay.
Okay. Okay, what would you like?
whatever you've got.
I actually,
Get too much.
I had a cheesecake story for
Whatever's
my
there.
Yeah.
bar mitzvah.
What?
So I've always loved, especially when I was younger, I really loved cheesecake.
Okay, who wants
And-
a plain? You want just plain?
Sure.
All I really,
Thank you.
I couldn't wait until
Okay.
I got through the service, and the whole time, all I was thinking about
I will
was,
take the chocolate.
okay,
And I
yes.
think Mary Alice was
Yeah.
looking for chocolate, yes?
Oh,
Just a
okay.
little bit.
You want chocolate?
Please, just a little taste.
Sure.
Quite good.
It's pretty good, right?
Okay,
Well,
and
you
all I
can't go
could
wrong
think
with
about was having this
Wait a minute,
blueberry
is it from
cheesecake.
Junior's?
No, it's not from Junior's. I wasn't able to make
Yeah.
that one happen for you
Okay,
guys this
no, no,
time.
no, no,
Sure.
Okay, never mind. Okay.
And then for my,
Just give me a, is
This
this
one?
chocolate? Yeah, I'm getting
yeah,
chocolate.
I think
Okay,
both
I'm
of
going
these
to
are
bring it
chocolate.
over.
But then there was a photographer who
Oh,
kept
thank you.
insisting on taking
Oh,
photos
thank
here,
you.
taking photos there.
Oh,
Then it was done, and I said, okay, now time to have what I've really waited for, my blueberry cheesecake. And it was gone.
Oh
I was not a happy camper.
no! Right.
But fortunately, this actually for my birthday, just a week ago,
Thank you.
my parents surprised me with
Can you have?
a Junior's
Yes, thank you.
cheesecake.
In the mail, or did it get?
I don't know if it was where they got it from.
Okay.
Maybe they went into the city, but either way, I was very happy.
Well, you can't go wrong with Junior's.
Yeah.
I gotta say, certainly one of my favorites.
So I missed one of your lectures. What was that about? The first one
It's
before
delicious.
the
Oh, good.
basil and
Very
Oh,
black
good.
and
Well,
white?
you can't go wrong with
Oh,
cheesecake.
the
You
happy.
definitely
What
can't.
did you talk about?
What was the first? That was the black and white cookies.
So the first day was, oh gosh, it's been so long. We started with bagels. We had oysters.
I
we did
was there,
steak.
so this was 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
that
So
is-
then the second one was the one that Ron was at. It was that wasn't the Bloody Mary day. That was donuts.
Ah.
Oh, I missed
Oh,
that.
I was there for that day.
I missed the donut one.
Donuts.